They came seeking knowledge. Now they're learning why Earth's called the ultimate death world and why they never should have come. You know, it's funny, the universe is filled with advanced civilizations, spacefaring species, galactic empires, and super intelligent beings who can fold reality like it's a deck of cards. But all of them, every last one, seem to make the same mistake when they come across Earth. They underestimate it. And when I say underestimate, I don't mean they think we're weak. No, most of them don't even think we're worth the trouble. The common consensus among the more enlightened galactic species is that Earth is just a quirky little backwater, home to a bunch of primitive creatures squabbling over resources. They sent the occasional probe, sure, maybe a few scientists to collect samples, but they never took us seriously. That is until they did. I've been called many things: exobiologist, ambassador, apologist. But the truth is, I'm just the guy who had to explain to the galaxy that Earth wasn't the benign playground they thought it was. Most days, I'd take a bit of pride in my work, but after what happened to the crew of that ill-fated expedition, I'm not so sure anymore. Not that they listened to me, of course. I told them, repeatedly, that Earth was dangerous in ways they couldn't fathom. But when you've mastered star travel and can wipe out a moon with a flick of your wrist, you think you know everything. Yeah, I can be cynical. It's kind of my thing. I've got this running theory that the universe would have been a much safer place if everyone stayed in their own little corner and didn't poke around where they didn't belong, Earth especially. It's not that we're inherently violent, mind you. We don't go around hunting sentient species for sport. But we've learned over millennia how to survive in a place where everything from the plants to the air we breathe wants to kill you. If you don't believe me, just ask the crew of that doomed expedition. Their mission was straightforward enough: catalog Earth's flora and fauna, take samples, observe, maybe drop a few well-meaning diplomats into the mix if they were feeling charitable. They probably thought they were just doing some basic research, nothing more than a weekend science project for the galaxy. They arrived in orbit, set up their landing zones, and immediately began deploying their cutting-edge equipment. They wore the usual arrogance of the highly intelligent: shiny suits, military-grade tech, and all the confidence in the universe that nothing could go wrong. You should have seen their faces when the first acid rainstorm hit. Oh, it was hilarious. In a "what did you expect, you pompous bastard" kind of way. They didn't understand Earth's climate, they didn't understand our atmosphere, and they sure as hell didn't understand our wildlife. The first sign of trouble came when their atmosphere processors malfunctioned. Their fancy suits, designed to protect them from any known environmental hazards, started to crack. The humid, oxygen-rich air of Earth began to choke them. Their advanced helmets fogged up, their systems short-circuited. I watched them scramble, completely lost, as the sky turned an ominous orange with the first storm. They didn't understand that Earth doesn't just survive, it fights. The plants? They were designed to defend themselves, releasing spores that clouded their sensors. The insects? A swarm of them had a habit of seeing foreign life as a threat. Every living thing on Earth seemed to have evolved in a way that demanded survival through aggression. And then there were the animals. They came across what they thought was a peaceful creature, a docile mammal in the plains, and began to study it. But before they could even touch it, a pack of smaller, seemingly harmless animals attacked. It was an ambush. Swift, coordinated, ruthless. The crew was panicking, their calm, calculated demeanor cracking under the pressure. They had underestimated Earth, and now it was showing them exactly why that was a fatal mistake. And that was just the beginning. They thought they were prepared, they were wrong, and now Earth was showing them exactly why. The aliens were unlike anything I had ever seen, or rather, anything I had imagined. They didn't look like the sleek, perfect beings from the holodocs. They weren't streamlined, anthropomorphic entities with flawless symmetry. No, they were a patchwork of forms that defied convention, their bodies a strange mix of organic and mechanical parts. Some had exoskeletons fused with crystalline growths, while others sported multiple limbs in odd configurations, more like something out of a nightmare than a scientific breakthrough. Their skin, if you could call it that, was often more like tough, iridescent plating, shifting color depending on their environment. But it wasn't just their appearance that set them apart, it was their worldview. These beings had mastered the art of observation, of detachment. To them, emotions were a liability, a weakness to be eradicated in the pursuit of knowledge. They viewed themselves as cosmic archivists, guardians of information in a galaxy full of ignorance. Their civilization was built on an unyielding belief that everything had its place, its order, its category. Every action was calculated, every interaction stripped of sentimentality. They didn't feel things the way we do. They observed, they studied, they cataloged. Feelings were messy, chaotic, and in a universe they had come to understand in logical terms, chaos was something to be avoided at all costs. I had learned to recognize this detachment the moment I met them. The leader of their expedition, a towering figure with 6 limbs and 4 eyes, had greeted me with the same clinical indifference he would a data stream. His greeting wasn't warm, wasn't even polite in the conventional sense. At first, I'd been fascinated by their ability to suppress emotion, their coldness, and how they could remain so composed in the face of danger. I was, after all, human, and we have an entire range of emotions, from joy to sorrow, from anger to fear. But these beings? They had no such luxury. It wasn't a matter of self-retrieval. It was simply that emotions didn't factor into their worldview. For them, a life was an equation to be solved, and a species like humanity was an anomaly in that equation. We were unpredictable, chaotic, ruled by impulses they couldn't calculate, and yet they came here thinking they could control it all. I remember their initial surprise when they arrived in the dense jungles of Earth's equator. They had assumed the environment would be tame, manageable, like so many other planets they'd visited. These beings were experts in climate control, accustomed to creating artificial ecosystems where they could manipulate weather patterns and atmospheric composition with ease. But on Earth, they encountered an adversary they didn't know how to defeat, an ecosystem that didn't play by any known rules. The first real sign of trouble came when their atmosphere processors malfunctioned. Their suits were supposed to protect them from every known hazard, every known pathogen, and yet the humid, oxygen-rich air of Earth began to choke them. Their high-tech helmets fogged up, their systems short-circuited. It wasn't a matter of oxygen levels or atmospheric pressure. It was something much more insidious, something these beings had never accounted for: Earth's natural chemistry. Earth was in many ways a symphony of unpredictability, from the microbial life in the soil to the diverse chemical reactions taking place in every inch of the atmosphere. Earth was alive in a way that even their sophisticated scanners couldn't process. These beings had never encountered such a vibrant, chaotic, and fundamentally alive environment. Each step they took on this planet was a gamble. Their confusion was palpable when they tried to make contact with the local flora. Earth's plants in their mind were just collections of biomass that could be cataloged and classified. But when they tried to approach a towering tree species in the Amazon, the very air around it seemed to shift, releasing toxic spores that sent their sensors into overdrive. The beings had failed to account for the planet's capacity for defense. Earth's plants and animals weren't passive, they fought back. It wasn't until they took a closer look at Earth's fauna that things started to spiral further. One of their biologists, a being with a segmented body and 8 arms, tried to collect data on a seemingly docile creature, a large herbivorous mammal that grazed in the plains. What they didn't expect was that this creature had evolved a complex defense mechanism, a pack of smaller predatory creatures that attacked in unison the moment one of their own was threatened. The beings were caught off guard, their advanced weapons malfunctioning in the chaos of a predatory hunt. It was then that the true nature of Earth began to reveal itself. Earth's ecosystem wasn't something that could be studied in a sterile lab. It was violent, untamed, and unpredictable. There was no perfect system of classification. There were no neat categories. There was only survival. And in that, Earth's excelled beyond anything these beings had ever encountered. As their crew began to show signs of illness, their shields cracking under the strain of biological threats they couldn't counter, I watched them struggle to maintain their calm. They couldn't understand what was happening, and their frustrations grew. The more they tried to control Earth, the more Earth pushed back, teaching them an invaluable, albeit painful, lesson. Earth was not something that could be mastered. It was something that had mastered them long before they ever arrived. That's when I started to see humanity in a new light. From the outside, we might seem primitive, our technology crude compared to theirs, but there was something about us that Earth had shaped, something we had come to understand on an instinctual level. We knew how to survive here, how to adapt when faced with danger, how to weather storms and illness. We were survivors by nature, not by design. And that, in a way, was the key difference between us and these beings. While they had built their empire on control and precision, humanity thrived in chaos. We weren't as efficient, as calculating, but we were unpredictable in ways that made us resilient. Where they saw failure, We saw opportunity. Hmm, hmm. I had watched the crew slowly break down. Their commander, once so proud, so full of certainty, now looked over Earth with a kind of baffled despair. They thought they could understand everything with their scans, their algorithms, and their cold logic, but Earth refused to be categorized. Good. It was then that I realized they weren't just here to study us, they were here to conquer us, to absorb us into their order. They hadn't come to observe, they had come to dominate. But Earth had other plans. When the aliens first arrived, they had all the typical expectations. Humans, primitive, disorganized, easily manipulated. They'd cataloged thousands of species across the galaxy, and humanity was just another curiosity, another bump on the radar. But I knew better. Earth had a way of revealing truths that even the most advanced beings couldn't understand. The first human they encountered was full of the usual optimism. There was this intense eagerness in the way humans often greet new challenges, especially when it involves something as monumental as first contact. The aliens, though, they didn't have time for pleasantries. They didn't know how to process enthusiasm or hospitality, so when the human extended a hand in greeting, the alien just stared at it as if the action itself were an enigma. I was watched from the sidelines, suppressing the urge to chuckle. There was no point in explaining human customs just yet. Instead, I stepped in, offering a more formal introduction. "This is Earth," I said matter-of-factly, gesturing to the chaotic beauty of our planet. "It's an interesting place, but you might want to brace yourselves." The aliens blinked. Well, they didn't blink exactly, but the subtle shift in their eye lenses was their equivalent of surprise. The leader of their group tilted his head, observing the human in front of him. His species was known for its calm, detached nature. They didn't view people as individuals, they saw them as data points in an equation. It was that lack of warmth that had always been the biggest contrast between their kind and ours. Now, the question they asked next stuck with me. How do humans survive in this environment? Why has this planet not completely annihilated your species? At that moment, I couldn't help but smile. "Welcome to Earth," I said dryly. "You're standing on a literal death world." The alien didn't get the joke. Their expression, if you could call it that, remained blank. But I wasn't about to explain further. There's a certain satisfaction in letting someone work things out for themselves, especially when they've walked into something they can't quite control. It's true that Earth isn't the easiest planet to live on, but it's not because we've been shaping the environment to fit our needs. Oh no, Earth doesn't care what we want. If anything, the planet has been trying to get rid of us for millennia. The truth is, humanity's success lies in our ability to adapt. Where other species might have bent under the weight of Earth's ferocity, humans bent with it. We didn't just survive. No, we learned how to survive. The aliens had no idea how to comprehend this. To them, the world could be easily controlled. Its weather patterns manipulated, ecosystems curated. They expected Earth to be a predictable system. After all, their own species had long ago perfected the art of regulation. But Earth wasn't a machine. It wasn't something you could monitor from a console. It was a living, breathing force that had been evolving for billions of years. When it came time for lunch, I thought the aliens might take a step back from the world's harshness and engage in some simple human ritual. The human in question had prepared a meal for them, just a basic sandwich, a little taste of home. The aliens stared at it for a long time, analyzing every ingredient like it was some kind of toxic artifact. There was something inherently amusing in watching these highly intelligent beings look so confused by something as mundane as a sandwich. They didn't understand why we cared so much about food. To them, sustenance was purely functional, a chemical process to be optimized. To humans, though, food was so much more than that. It was connection, it was culture, it was an experience. The alien took a tentative bite, still skeptical. It wasn't just a food item to them. It was a mystery, an anomaly. "This is pleasurable?" one of them finally managed to ask. It was a slow realization, a crack in their logical armor. And in that moment, they started to understand something about us that they hadn't anticipated. Humans didn't just consume life. We experienced it. This wasn't just about the food. It was about how we approached everything in life. A human didn't just work, they found meaning in their work. They didn't just survive, they found ways to enjoy survival. And that was a concept the aliens struggled with. As the days passed, it became even clearer that the aliens didn't understand us at all. They had arrived thinking that their advanced technology would be enough to control Earth, to study it, to measure it, but Earth had something else in store for them. One of their engineers attempted to study the local climate, which seemed relatively benign. It was a simple task on the surface. After all, they had the technology to manipulate entire planets' atmospheres, but they weren't prepared for Earth's unpredictable weather patterns. The rain came fast and fierce, catching them off guard. The engineers' high-tech equipment malfunctioned, sparking and hissing as if the storm itself was a force to be reckoned with. Meanwhile, a local human farmer, without any specialized gear, walked by the same storm with ease. He had nothing more than a tarp to shield himself, but he didn't need anything else. He'd lived through this before. He knew how to deal with it. That was the moment the aliens started to grasp something fundamental about humanity. We didn't control our environment. We didn't need to. We had learned to adapt to it. We didn't fight against Earth. We learned how to work with it, how to ride out its storms and grow in the face of challenges. To the aliens, this was baffling. We didn't need to be the smartest, the fastest, or the most efficient. What set humanity apart was our ability to endure. We persisted. And for the first time, the aliens were beginning to realize that Earth wasn't just a random place in the universe. It was the ultimate testing ground. A death world, yes, but a death world where humanity had mastered the art of survival. But from the moment the aliens arrived, the tension was palpable. At first, it was subtle, an unspoken friction between their calculated, orderly worldview and the chaotic, unpredictable nature of Earth. But soon, that tension became more than just a few awkward silences. It was a storm waiting to happen. It started with the first real disagreement. The aliens had their sights set on Earth's natural resources, specifically a mineral deposit they believed would revolutionize their energy systems. From their perspective, it was a simple transaction. They wanted the minerals, they'd give us technology in return. They'd made it clear that their species operated on an exchange-based system where every interaction had a purpose, a return on investment. At that point, they had no interest in meaningless gestures like diplomacy or camaraderie. They didn't care about our culture or history, only our value in the grand scheme of the universe. At first, the human reaction was calm. A few of us, myself included, tried to explain that Earth wasn't a simple market commodity. This planet, this ecosystem, it was fragile. You couldn't just come in and take what you wanted without considering the consequences. We weren't interested in trade for trade's sake, not when it involved something as precious as Earth's delicate balance. But the aliens weren't listening. They couldn't understand the concept of stewardship. In their minds, the resource was theirs for the taking, and no argument could change that. They'd tried to reason with us, but reason didn't work when the core beliefs of both species were at odds. It didn't take long before the situation escalated. The aliens were too used to getting what they wanted. They expected cooperation, not resistance. And when they didn't get it, they began to resort to their usual tactics: force, pressure, and manipulation. They tried to control the situation by subtly influencing the humans in positions of power, swaying decisions behind closed doors with promises of advanced technology and improved living conditions. It was a classic play. Use their superior technology to manipulate our leaders into giving up more than they should. That's when the real cracks in their understanding of humanity started to show. While the aliens were busy pushing their agenda, they didn't realize that the people of Earth didn't operate like them. Our leaders, the ones they sought to manipulate, were not so easily swayed by promises of shiny new tech. It wasn't that we didn't appreciate progress. We did, but we had something they didn't: a history of resistance. We had been pushed to the brink before by forces far greater than the aliens, and we had always fought back. The problem was that the aliens didn't see resistance as a valid tactic. To them, it was inefficient, illogical. Why fight when you could simply convince others to fall in line? They didn't understand that for us, the fight was the point. It was about survival. It was about freedom. It was about something more than just a transaction. This is where I began to see the cracks in my own perspective. I had spent so much time trying to prove to the aliens that Earth wasn't just some backwater planet. But what I didn't realize was that Earth wasn't just a planet. Earth was a living thing, and humanity was a product of its unpredictable, brutal nature. We had been shaped by the chaos of this world, and in that chaos, we found something the aliens couldn't understand: purpose. I started to notice how the humans around me responded. They weren't backing down from the aliens' attempts at manipulation. Instead, they were organizing, discussing, strategizing. There was an energy among the people that the aliens had missed entirely. It wasn't a calculated energy, it wasn't strategic. It was raw, spontaneous, and full of the kind of unpredictability that had allowed us to survive for millennia. In secret meetings, humans from all walks of life, farmers, engineers, politicians, even ordinary citizens, began to band together. They didn't trust the aliens. They didn't care about their technology or promises. They cared about their families, their land, their way of life, and they were willing to fight for it. But the aliens didn't see it coming. They thought they could isolate key individuals, apply pressure, and the rest of humanity would fall in line. They didn't realize that for every human who might bend to their will, there were 100 more who would resist, simply out of principle. And finally, they realized how far they could push things and how far they can trust and how much you see when that happens. I saw it firsthand when one of their diplomats came to me offering a final solution to the standoff. Let the aliens mine the mineral deposits, and in exchange, humanity would be given access to their most advanced technologies. The promise was simple: peace in exchange for cooperation. I knew the deal wasn't just about the resources, it was a power play. The aliens wanted to prove that they could control us, that they could force us into submission without firing a single shot, and they thought I'd be the perfect person to broker that deal. But here's the thing, humans don't respond well to being told what to do, especially when it comes to something as essential as our planet. In the end, the deal fell apart, not because the aliens weren't persuasive, but because they couldn't comprehend the most essential truth about humanity. We don't always act in our best interest. We act out of a sense of duty, out of pride, out of something deeper than logic. We act because we have to. And that's when it happened. The confrontation that I had dreaded, that I had tried so desperately to avoid, finally came. The aliens had pushed too far. They had underestimated us one too many times, and now they were going to see just what Earth was capable of. It wasn't a violent revolution, not at first. It started with small acts of resistance. The sabotage of their mining equipment, the leak of sensitive documents that showed the true intentions behind their technological offers. Then it grew. Humans in cities and rural areas began to unite, using their knowledge of Earth's terrain and ecosystems to disrupt the alien operations. It was guerrilla warfare, but not in the traditional sense. The humans didn't have advanced weapons or armies. What they had was knowledge of their world, its terrain, its storms, its hazards, and the ability to turn even the smallest advantage into a tactical victory. It became clear that the aliens' technology, however advanced, couldn't account for Earth's natural defenses. The planet itself was fighting back, and humanity was using it to their advantage. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The aliens, who had once believed themselves to be the most intelligent, the most powerful, now found themselves struggling against a force they had never considered: human ingenuity. They had underestimated us, not just in terms of strength, but in terms of will. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about proving something. It was about showing the universe that Earth and humanity were not to be taken lightly. And as the conflict escalated, I finally understood. Humans weren't just resilient, they were resourceful. They weren't the most powerful species, but they were the most adaptable. The aliens thought they could break us, but instead they were learning the hard way that humanity could not be bent, not by threats, not by force, and certainly not by empty promises. It was the aliens who were starting to crumble under the pressure, and the more they tried to control Earth, the more they realized the truth. They were the ones who were powerless here. They might have had the technology, but humanity had something far stronger: the will to survive.
The battle for Earth wasn't a typical war. There were no grand armies clashing on vast fields, no massive explosions lighting up the sky. It wasn't a matter of might, it was a matter of will. And when the aliens finally realized that they had underestimated humanity, it was already too late. It started as a quiet moment, a pause between the chaos. The alien leader, who had once been so sure of their victory, stood alone on a ridge overlooking a stretch of scorched earth. The remnants of their mining operations now sabotaged beyond repair. They had tried everything. They had threatened, manipulated, and deceived, and yet nothing had worked. Humans weren't bowing to their will. Instead, they were adapting, pushing back, making the very environment fight on their behalf. The alien leader, their expression unreadable, spoke to no one in particular. I thought they would break. The words weren't a declaration of defeat, but a statement of disbelief. The aliens had run countless simulations, all of them concluding that the humans were no more than a footnote in the grand scheme of the galaxy, a species too disorganized, too divided to ever mount a meaningful resistance. The aliens, therefore, each grabbing what property claims they could, thought they would break. The words weren't included in the class sheet, but Earth and its inhabitants had proven them wrong. In the weeks leading up to this moment, I had watched the transformation. It wasn't just that humans had adapted to the situation, it was something deeper. There was a spark in them, something I had failed to understand at first. It wasn't just survival, it was defiance. They weren't just fighting for Earth, they were fighting for something more intangible, their identity, their legacy, their right to exist on their own terms. Um, but it wasn't only the humans who had evolved. The aliens, too, had changed. The more they encountered human resilience, the more they began to question their own assumptions. They had come to Earth thinking they could simply take what they needed, but in the process, they had learned that not all species could be controlled. Not all problems could be solved with technology. They had begun to understand that what made humanity strong wasn't their weapons, their tools, or even their cleverness. It was something far more elusive, something the aliens couldn't uh, quantify. Um, the turning point came um, when one of the alien diplomats, previously a staunch advocate for total domination, was caught in the middle of a human resistance strike. It was a small group of humans, no more than 20, against a heavily armored alien faction. They didn't have superior weapons or technology. What they had was determination, knowledge of the land, and a deep understanding of the one thing the aliens had never considered, the element of surprise. In the heat of the moment, with laser blasts ricocheting around them, the alien diplomat realized something. They had underestimated humans not because they were primitive, but because they were unpredictable. They were a species that refused to conform, that refused to follow the script. The diplomat had been wrong all along. And that differentiation was what led to this major turning point that determined aliens are human. And the point to this is that the aliens weren't dealing with an inferior species. They were dealing with something far more dangerous, a species that could think on its feet, improvise, and adapt in ways the aliens simply couldn't. As the humans dispersed, melting into the environment as if they were one with it, the alien diplomat found themselves alone, face to face with one of the resistance leaders. A woman, no older than 30, with dirt streaked across her face and a fire in her eyes that could rival any of their weapons. "You don't understand," the alien diplomat began, the words heavy with a mix of frustration and admiration. "This will never end. You cannot win." uh, the human leader, with a calmness that took the alien by surprise, responded, "Maybe not, but we'll never stop trying." Then she turned toward the little old woman with a tender smile and said, "I know why." It was in that moment that the alien leader understood. Humans didn't need to win. They needed to resist. That was their strength. They didn't rely on force or domination. They relied on something more enduring, their unwillingness to give up, no matter how impossible the odds. I watched from the sidelines, feeling a shift in the air. For the first time, I saw the aliens not as invaders, but as visitors, guests in a world they couldn't control. And the humans, in turn, had begun to see themselves as something more than just survivors. They were warriors, yes, But more importantly, they were stewards of their world. They had learned how to live with the chaos, to bend without breaking, the way the world fought back against the aliens. Storms, wild animals, terrain, had shown the aliens something they could never have understood from their distant vantage point. Earth was not something to be dominated. It was something to be respected. The final confrontation wasn't a battle. It wasn't even a negotiation. It was a silent agreement, forged through the understanding that both species had something to offer. If they could find a way to coexist. About that at the time, but that wasn't a lesson the aliens could learn easily. It took months, years even, for the true scope of their failure to sink in. Earth wasn't just another planet to conquer. It was a living, breathing entity that didn't bend to their will. It fought back, and it fought with the strength of everything it had ever produced. Humanity. In the end, the aliens left, not because they couldn't conquer us, but because they realized they didn't need to. They had come to Earth expecting to claim it as their own, but they left with something else. Respect. Respect for the planet, respect for the humans who had lived here for millennia, and respect for the strength of a species that refused to be broken. In my heart, I still hoped for something more. But when the species failed to move soon, the torrent of rage from my previous addiction started pouring back. I stood on the edge of a ruined battlefield, watching the last of the alien ships disappear into the distance. The war was over, but the world had changed. The humans had shown the galaxy something they would never forget. Earth was the ultimate death world, not because of its dangers, but because of what its inhabitants could endure. And as I reflected on everything that had transpired, I couldn't help but think that the aliens had come to Earth expecting to teach us something, but in the end, they were the ones who had learned.
The aliens had long since left. Their ships, once a constant presence in Earth's sky, had faded into the distance, their shimmering silhouettes disappearing beyond the horizon. There had been no final battle, no dramatic last-minute showdown. It had ended quietly, with little fanfare. And yet the world felt different, better somehow. The alien presence had been a disruption, a catalyst for change. But now that they were gone, humanity was left to reckon with what it had learned, and more importantly, what it had become. I stood in the middle of a field, the remnants of an alien outpost still smoldering behind me. It had been dismantled by the resistance, not with weapons or firepower, but with the kind of ingenuity that had once been dismissed as chaos. The earth beneath my feet was scarred, yes, but it was healing. And with each passing day, I could feel the pulse of life returning to the land. The animals, the plants, the very soil. It was all coming back. I glanced at the horizon, where the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the landscape. In the distance, a small group of humans was gathering. I recognized a few faces, people who had been part of the resistance, who had fought tooth and nail to protect their homes and their planet. They weren't heroes in the traditional sense. There were no medals, no parades, but they had done something far more important. They had preserved the very thing that made Earth unique. I couldn't help but smile. The aliens had come expecting an easy victory, a planet ripe for the taking. But what they hadn't understood was that Earth wasn't just a place. It was a force shaped by chaos, by struggle, by survival. And humanity, for all its flaws, was a product of that force. They had survived wars, famine, disease, and destruction, not just through brute strength, but through their ability to adapt, to bend without breaking. The aliens had thought that their technology would give them an upper hand. What they didn't realize was that Earth's greatest asset wasn't technology, it was its people. And that's what had ultimately driven the aliens away. And aliens and their torpedoes were larger than the ships. Some of them had even spilled out. Before long, the shadow had melted away round the ruins. The sun was rising, and people were getting brave, and the conflict had forced them to see themselves. differently. They had grown. The conflict had forced them to see themselves differently. They had discovered a sense of unity, not born of common ideals or shared history, but of a shared experience. They had faced an enemy who had no regard for their way of life, and in doing so, they had come to appreciate what they had, what they could lose, and what they were willing to fight for. There was a peace in that realization. The world wasn't perfect, far from it. There were still challenges ahead. The scars of the alien invasion would linger, and the rebuilding process would take time. But there was hope, not in the absence of conflict, but in the ability to overcome it, to find strength in the face of adversity. Unbearable. As I turned to leave the field, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. The aliens had come to Earth believing they were the masters of the universe, that they could bend this world to their will. And in the end, they had learned the hard way that Earth wasn't something to be controlled. It was something to be respected. And that was a lesson they would carry with them wherever they went. I muttered under my breath, smiling as I shook my head. They might just be the universe's best kept secret. But even that, I knew, wasn't the full story. The universe was vast, filled with mysteries and wonders that no one had yet discovered. And humanity, despite their victory, had only just begun to scratch the surface. There would be more challenges, more unknowns, but for now Earth stood strong, and humanity stood even stronger. A soft breeze ruffled the grass around me, and for the first time since the invasion began, I felt a sense of peace. The world wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and that, I thought, was enough.